Okay, today we're going to be talking about magic, the ancient to medieval church, competition, synthesis, and persecution. Now, from the dawn of the human need to cope with the natural world, the unpredictability of her forces nurturing life or ushering in death, religious actions were performed in hopes of mitigating, even appeasing the elements, thereby gaining via ritual contract just enough of the supernatural power to protect the hearth and home, to keep the game plentiful and the harvest rich, to achieve the boon of fertility, even within the womb, to keep back foes, whether natural or human, and yes, to even acquire positions of power for those aspiring to lead their respective communities. With magic so deeply entrenched in the human psyche of everyday life, the arriving church certainly faced a daunting challenge. For the Christian clergy taught that the age of magic was over, that Christ had ushered in a new age, one where prayers and petitions replaced invocations and spells, where miracles replaced magic. But, the majority of commoners lacked a coherent knowledge of advanced theology. And it must be said, so did the majority of the priests, with the results that from the early through the medieval church and even into the Reformation, Christianity itself, as it competed with the local paganism, often adopted the very same practices, basically becoming a hybrid between both perspectives. Now, the controversy concerning magic in the church originates right from the beginning of Christianity, right to the person of Jesus himself. For there was a profound confusion over the origins of its power, as relating, for example, to the feeding of the 5,000, or the healing of the sick, blind, and lame, and the calming of the great sea, and of course, the raising of the dead. Now, while many scholars today argue whether Jesus actually performed these acts or not, or whether they were just stories later glossed onto the historical Jesus, where the valid central precepts were understood as his, moral teachings, as Thomas Jefferson once believed, or his words proclaiming that the kingdom of God was at hand. No, that's not the point. That's not even the point of this discussion. I am here emphasizing the fact that whether these early narratives in the Gospels are authentic or not, the stories relating to these mysterious happenings attributed to Christ were received differently based on the particular audience who heard them. You see, to some people, Jesus was performing miracles, and these would be, of course, those who would be deemed as Christians. But to others, Jesus was performing magic and was a great magician. The pivotal point here is belief. If Jesus was truly, the Son of God, or had the literal Spirit upon him, he practiced miracles. But if he is simply a man, and one was connected to belief system considered, either divisive or troublesome, then he was perceived as practicing magic. Of course, there were those who really couldn't tell the difference between miracle and magic, who were also Christians and Jews and pagans. Now, according to many within the Jewish community from the first century on, Jesus was indeed, we know this for a fact. Many Jews believe that Jesus was a great magician, said to be the deceiver of many people of Israel. This legacy is specifically mentioned in the Mishnah. That's right, the fourth tractate of a fourth, basically, which was first gathered in the 2nd century CE. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and read from the Mishnah right now. It asserts, quote, on the eve of the Passover, Yeshua was hanged. For 40 days before the execution took place, a herald went forth and cried, "He is going forth to be stoned because he has practiced sorcery and has enticed Israel to apostasy." Now, the Talmud compiled in the 6th century also states as follows. So this is another Jewish writing. It states, "The teacher said, Yeshua practiced sorcery and corrupted and misled Israel," unquote. Now, the earliest extant sources for this accusation by Jewish leaders may actually be found within the Gospels themselves. For the charges refer to Jesus as, quote, "an evildoer." And this is mentioned in John 18:30. And so this is the Greek word kakopoios, a term usually mentioned in contexts related to magic. Even within the Justinian Codex, it refers to the Chaldeans and magicians and the rest whom common people call men who are doing evil. Malficia. Now, malficia, I want to mention this. It's interesting. This idea of those who practice dark magic, those who practice evil actions, this idea of malficium. This is the word for those who practice the dark arts. And this word is applied all the way through into the Middle Ages, all the way through even to the time of the Reformation. Just kind of mentioning that. Now, the word in Matthew 27:62, excuse me, the word planos is translated as deceiver. And this word is also used within a magical context. For example, Justin Martyr in his dialogue with Trifle tells how the Jews refer to Jesus as both, quote, "a magician," magos, and a deceiver, planos, of the people. So, of course, now, obviously, while they do refer to Paul the Apostle also as a sorcerer and a deceiver in the Acts of Peter as well. So the idea of the deception is to trick, to show things that are really not there, an idea readily connected to magic, for magic is often illusionary and deceptive by nature. Now, by the middle of the 2nd century, the pagan anti-Christian apologist, his name is Cornelius Celsus. He proclaimed as follows. This is an apologist. This is a pagan apologist. He's looking at the historical Jesus, and he says, "Well, actually, I have another viewpoint of him. I have another perspective." Again, this is the 2nd century. Okay, so this is another one. He goes as follows. He says, "It was by magic." He starts off right there. "It was by magic that he, being Jesus, was able to do miracles." There it is. So I'm making it very clear from a Jewish as well as a pagan perspective. I'm giving you the sources, I'm quoting them verbatim. Jesus absolutely 100% was viewed as a magician, okay, by pagan as well as Jewish sources. Okay, just want to get that down. Make that very clear. This is not a point of controversy. This is what they actually believed, right? Celsus actually believed that Jesus acquired his magical skills while in Egypt. He writes this again. This is from the 2nd century. This is only 100 years after the lifetime of Christ. He says, "After she, Mary, had been driven out by her husband, and while she was wandering about in a disgraceful way, she secretly gave birth to Jesus. Because he was poor, he hired himself as a workman in Egypt, and there tried his hand at certain magical powers on which the Egyptians pride themselves. He returned full of conceit because of these powers, and on account of them gave himself the title of God." Okay. Now, according to Celsus, because magic convinced only the most simple-minded, Jesus, quote, won over only 10 sailors and tax collectors of the most abominable nature as disciples, unquote. And as far as, he also, he's said to convince, he says, wool workers, cobblers, laundry workers, the most illiterate and bucolic yokels. So there you have it. That's a quote from the 2nd century. So as you may see here, to Celsus, the magic of Jesus was partly charms and partly parlor tricks, illusions created to foster faith amongst the masses, but actions that would be considered as too transparent and obvious for those who are well educated, as he himself seems to proclaim. Right? Interesting, huh? In the 3rd century, the pagan Neoplatonist, his name is Heracles, compared Jesus with the famous 1st century sage by the name of Apollonius of Tyana, who is also known for practicing great acts of power and saw them in a similar light. He states as follows: in their anxiety to exalt Jesus, they run up and down, prating of how he made the blind see and worked certain other miracles of the kind. Let us note, however, how much better and more sensible is the view which we take of such matters, and explain the conception which we entertain of men gifted with remarkable powers. But so he goes on. Okay, so but what happens is he compares them obviously to somebody who practices great powers. Again, like Celsus, this pagan philosopher, Heracles, stereotypes the idea that the miracle stories of Jesus are intended to deceive the uneducated, contrasting to what he believed were the new Reformed thinkers who endorsed Apollonius of Tyana. Now, of course, early Christians were quite familiar with these claims. This is well known. Justin Martyr, who is an early Christian apologist, writes, this is the 2nd century, this dialogue with Rietveld. He refers to the common Jewish perception of Jesus, stating, quote, for they dared to call him a magician, magus, and a deceiver, planes, of the people. And then in the pseudo-Clementine recognitions of the 2nd to the 3rd centuries, this Christian work depicts Jewish scribes shouting out to the Christians, quote, the signs and miracles which your Jesus wrought, he wrought not as a prophet, but as a magician, unquote. In the Acts of Pilate, which dates between 150 to 255 CE, the Jewish people are portrayed as stating that, quote, by using magic, he, Jesus, does these things, and by having the demons on his side, unquote. They also assert in this apocryphal work that he must be a sorcerer, for he had the magical ability to send Pilate's wife a dream. Following the words also found in all 3 of the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus is further declared in the Acts of Pilate as a magician of the blackest of magic. He's, quote, they say unto him, he is a sorcerer, and by Beelzebub, prince of devils, he casteth out devils, and they are all subject unto him. By the way, this claim is not just found here. It's found in Mark 3:22, Matthew 12:24, Luke 11:15. This is common knowledge, ladies and gentlemen. You find the collaborative information even in the Gospels. This is just what people think. And if you're not a Christian, this is the general consensus. Okay, so even as late as the 4th century, Christians were busy countering claims that their founder was actually a great magician, with these defenders including Lactantius and Arnobius, with the latter referring to how many Jews believed Jesus actually took his magical names of the angels of might directly, the claim is, from the Egyptian temples. In fact, so it's claimed that Jesus took this magical power from the magic power words of the ancient Egyptians. Later on, of all places, this story starts to circulate and ends up in Jewish writings. in the Toldoth Yeshua, where it portrays Jesus as stealing the, quote, ineffable name of God from the Jewish temple itself, rather than, of course, the Egyptian temple that was popularized earlier on. According to the story, Jesus finds basically the divine name of God, the name that should never be pronounced. He discovers it in the temple. And what he does is he writes down upon a parchment and then places it into a cut in his leg so he could pass out of the holy structure with a name undedicated upon his person. So he basically goes into the temple, he sees his holy name, he writes it on a parchment, and then he cuts himself, puts it in his leg, and walks out. So what happens now, when he removes the parchment from his leg, Jesus proceeds to use this divine power word for his own purposes, performing many magical acts such as healing leopards and bringing a dead man back to life. Because of his powers, people began to worship him, according to this source, as the Messiah. And now, before we make any hasty judgments, we must realize the difference between magic and miracle was not as obvious as it seems. For not only was Jesus understood as a great magician amongst both Jews and pagans, but Christians too often depict him in the same way. You see, many early Christians appear to have conflated magic with miracles, not being certain for themselves where one ends and the other begins. For example, in the infancy gospel of Thomas, it shows Jesus making a sparrow out of clay. And then after completed it, he breathes life into the image, making the bird come to life, creating life out of an inanimate object, this is important, just to show one's power. Now, this enters into a very troublesome threshold between miracle and magic. Those who opposed him in this infancy gospel were to be destroyed through his powers, with this work telling how, quote, no one dared to anger him, lest he cursed them and he should be crippled. Well, that's not exactly a miraculous thing. That's a cursing, right? Once again, this is not the canonical gospels. This is not the four. This is the infancy gospel, but still provides evidence, the milieu of understanding amongst Christians. By the way, this idea of breathing life into this clay dove, this does get into the Quran. Yes, it does. So this is interesting. So it is in the Quran, connected to Jesus, Isa. As a result of this confusion, early Christians in leadership positions attempted to make the difference between magic and miracle. They try to do it as clear as possible. Now, Simon Magus, the disciple who attempted to buy the power of the Holy Spirit to heal in the Acts of the Apostles, becomes a quintessential example of a person who practiced magic as opposed to a miracle. A miracle was then understood by many of the more theologically educated as arriving only through the power of God, whereby the one performing the action becomes merely a humble and willing vessel that was intended by this higher power for a greater purpose that was always consistent with the will of God, always pure in a moral sense, and never motivated out of selfish desire that promoted oneself or one's interests. The Magus, however, is later portrayed in the Acts of Peter, fighting with the Apostle Paul, with the powers of the miracle revealed as always triumphing over the powers of magic. Another example of a contest between the apostles and the magician is a story of when Paul, Barnabas, and John Mark encountered the Jewish magician named Bar Jesus when they arrived at Paphos in Cyprus, mentioned in Acts chapter 13, verse 6. Here, Bar Jesus attempts to persuade the proconsul of Cyprus against Paul, in response to which the apostle calls him, quote, a man full of deceit and the son of the devil, unquote, after which he strikes him with temporary blindness. In Acts 18, Paul finds himself competing against Jewish exorcists in Ephesus. Now, I want to bring this up. Okay? So Paul finds himself competing against Jewish exorcists in the city of Ephesus, who, when hearing the name of Jesus that Paul was pronouncing over the sick and over the demon-possessed, they decided they're going to attempt to acquire what they believed was the magic power of the word for their own use. So this action apparently is not very successful. For according to the story, the demons did not recognize their authority to use these words, for only Paul could use them because of association with God through Jesus. And so the demons attacked them, and he ran out of the city with torn up clothes, all bloody and naked. Yet another story is that throws me off a little bit, and it creates a precedent that continues into the Middle Ages as well. And here it is. This is important. Okay. Yet the people of Ephesus took aprons off of Paul's body as he's walking about, according to the story. And these very materials that were against his skin were viewed as being able to automatically heal whoever it touched. Well, that's a little strange, right? As you can imagine. So in my book, there it is. Okay, I'm turning to page 55 of my book. I write as follows. I say, many translators will establish that, quote, God was performing extraordinary miracles by the hands of Paul. But, I write, the word dunamis is a feminine noun meaning power or strength. And while this power is described as being extraordinary, right, the qualification between miracle, power, or magic is really up to the observer and the interpreter. For the Ephesians would have seen this as an unusual manifested power that may not necessarily conform to the definition of a miracle. And we cannot be certain about the author's original intention. Also, while the passage conveys the sense that the clothing acts as an extension of the apostles' power, as transmitted through God, the point of departure with some of the others, similar references in the Gospels, is that these handkerchiefs and aprons were actually removed from his body and yet continued to be charged, so to speak, with healing energy apart from his presence. As would be expected, there's a great deal of controversy over whether the clothing removed from against Paul's skin actually healed people and cast out demons, as is the author's point of view. The idea is, wait a second, if you're following me, if the aprons that come from Paul, they're all, he's no longer touching them, it's no longer on his skin, but they believe that it had this, these miracles, these magical powers, or I should say powers, if it's believed to now, even when he's not around, and just by touching them, these inanimate objects, these pieces of cloth, the belief is that you're healed. Is that a miracle or is that magic? You can see where early Christians are saying, hey, we could use this for other things. We can connect this to maybe the relics of the saints. True, but we could also connect it to other kinds of objects, like amulets, like talismans, and you know what? Christians of plenty believe this, and they had the passage to substantiate the claim. And yes, they did use this passage. But is this a magic? It's a miracle. No. There we go. So we got to be very careful as we look at all these different ideas, right? Okay, but what about Christians, right? Could they perform magic too? Now, the first 10th century church manual, known as the Didache, or the teaching, states as follows. It says, thou shalt not do murder, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not corrupt boys, thou shalt not commit fornication, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not deal in magic. The word is meguses. Thou shalt not do sorcery. Of course, this is our English translation, right? So we take a look at what it means, and we look at the pharmacan for sorcery, and it literally means to give drugs and also the possibility of poisons. Wait, that's not, yeah, so we got to watch our English translators who automatically have a predisposition of what these Greek words mean. So it doesn't necessarily mean what we think it means. Now, for Justin Martyr, those who perform magic when converted no longer did so. So for this early Christian apologist from the 2nd century, those who perform magic when converted, they were no longer able to do so. He states as follows: those who once made use of magical arts have dedicated themselves to the good and unbegotten God. In fact, the initiation of baptism itself was believed to have the supernatural effect of purifying the new Christians from the influences of demons, and so by default, the power of magic and the possible manipulations associated with them. Part of this assurance was founded upon the ritual of exorcism itself that took place during the baptism ritual, which believed to, spiritually seal the initiate from any demonic powers, which, by the way, another early Christian writer in the 2nd century by the name of Ignatius of Antioch asserted, believed it acted as a medicine for immortality. In this sense, if a Christian was baptized, the ritual actually severed any magical cord to demons or any powers outside of God through Christ, making such ritual actions actually futile. In theory, then, a baptized Christian was unable to practice magic, even if he wanted to, or if he tried, it would be ineffective if he did. Of course, others could work the magic for him, or it could be placed upon him in the form of an amulet, right? Now, these acts were sometimes condemned, but sometimes not. This argument that why are we worried about magic? Why are we, if we believe in this belief system, then there's no such thing as magic. The only power comes from God, and except for there's terrible things that demons, the devil does. But you know what? If you're a Christian, if you're sealed by baptism, you're not able to do that anyway because you're sealed. So that idea is one of the ideas that became very popular during the early Middle Ages. We're talking the 6, 7, 8, 900s, where it's like, why legislate against it? Because it doesn't exist. Does that make sense? It's only later on it's a little bit weird. Ooh, you're learning too much already in this in this context. Okay. Now, a curious story concerning magic also entered popular consciousness that when Jesus was born, all the power of magic was broken, so that they were no longer a legitimate supernatural influence in the world. So magic ended when Jesus was born. Ignatius of Antioch, again from the 2nd century, notes as follows in the first decade of the 2nd century, right? He says, quote, now the virginity of Mary and her giving birth were hidden from the rulers of this age, as was also the death of our Lord. 3 mysteries to be loudly proclaimed that were accomplished in the silence of God. How then were they revealed to the ages? He says, a star shone forth in heaven, brighter than all the stars. Its light was indescribable, and its strangeness caused amazement. All the rest of the constellations, together with the sun and moon, formed a chorus around that star. Yet the star itself outshone them all. And there was perplexity about the origin of the strange phenomena that was unlike the others. Consequently, all magic and every kind of spell was dissolved. He says, the ignorance so characteristic of wickedness vanished, and the ancient kingdom was abolished when God appeared in human form to bring the newness of eternal life and what has been prepared by God to take effect. As a result, all things were thrown in ferment because the abolition of death were being carried out. So in this scenario, no one, not even pagans, right? No one, not even pagans, could perform effective magic. For when Jesus was born, the magical world ceased to be. All magic then was diffused, and those practicing magic were basically practicing empty gestures with no authentic power behind it. It's interesting, again, to take a look at these early views. As much as magic was discounted from the official status quo of the church, common Christians, guess what? They still believed they could practice the magical arts even after baptism. And so for them, the age of magic did not end with the advent of the age of Christ. In fact, the Council of Elvira, no, not the Mistress of the Dark, but it's a location, the Council of Elvira, convening in the year 306, in Canon 6, says as follows, quote, the Church Council, if someone kills another by sorcery or magic, that person shall not receive communion, even at the time of death. For this action is a form of idolatry. Idolatry. Now we're thinking, wait a second. This is kind of extreme. I don't know how to tell you, right? It's kind of extreme. Of all things, if they're doing magic and, if you're doing magic and you killed somebody, you're not part of the fold. I kind of get that. Kind of extreme, but there. So here, magic was directly connected with idolatry. That's the idea. Of course, the canon addresses a rather extreme use of magic. Now, Constantine the Great, in the 4th century, he proves to be the exemplar illustration of the kind of confusion that so many experience between miracle and magic. For while he asserted that either through a dream or a vision, he saw the sign of the cross or the Cairo with the declaration, with this sign conquered. The emperor took the sign of the cross, right? He placed the image upon his soldiers' standards and shields, and he used, in much the same way as a magical amulet, this symbol, which is perceived to be the Christian god's powers, to defeat his rival Maxentius. Wait a second. So he's taking the cross itself, the image of the cross, believes it as a power sign to knock out his enemy. Wait, is that a miracle? Or is that magic? Of course, Maxentius does lose. He's thrown into the Tiber River. Did validate Constantine's beliefs. From then on out, Constantine revered the symbol of the cross with his mother, Helena, supposedly discovering the piece of the true cross during her pilgrimage in the Holy Land. But he writes very little about the theology of the cross. However, it's interesting that that in his edicts concerning magic, the supposedly Christian emperor, between his edicts between 318 and 320, he censors what is understood as bad magic and divination that is conducted in private and under the cover of darkness. But he permits what is known as good magic and divination conducted, in the light of day, before everyone. Obviously, as an emperor, he doesn't want anybody making predictions that, hey, he's going to die and people will contend for his throne. But the point of the matter is, and it is an interesting point, is that this idea between good magic and bad magic, this context, will continue even after Christianity becomes the official belief system of the Roman Empire in the year 391 to 392 by Theodosius the First, and all the way through the early Middle Ages, and all the way through the High Middle Ages, and even into the late Middle Ages and the early modern era, you're going to have this definition between good magic, which is okay because God approves of it, and bad magic. It's the Protestants that change things around. Oh, wow. Again, you're learning too much. Now, as for the cult of the saints, again, the division between miracle magic was quite muddled, for while church doctrine permitted the idea that God may work through the agency of these relics to effect cures, many commoners and even theologians viewed these bones as automatically imbued with the power of healing within their very materiality, as they were mystically transposed between the realm of heaven and earth. This belief gave these relics immediate access to divine power. Of course, once someone believed that any object automatically performed for whoever would use it, and further still, that any person could access this power, we have entered absolutely a very definite magical rather than a miraculous worldview. I mean, this is pretty interesting. Now, the famous late 4th century church father by the name of John Chrysostom told how many Christians in Antioch, where he happened to live, how they believed that the Jewish, quote, charms, incantations, and amulets, unquote, could heal them. In fact, John himself admits that the Jewish magic actually appeared to work. What? Yeah. John Chrysostom said, yeah, the Jewish magic actually does seem to work. He says that, in his work on the Jews. If you want, section 8, 7, 937. Just, there it is. Jewish magic used the Hebrew alphabet, the letters of which were considered very powerful by both pagans and Christians alike. Many Christians must have asked themselves, were not the Jews God's original chosen people, and was not this language a gift to them from God? So many Greek and Roman magical papyri incorporate Jewish words or letters in their magical spells, with many formulas beginning with the phrase, quote, I exercise you in the Jewish language, unquote. The pagan magical papyri even use the transliterated form of the word Yahweh, Io, as one of their most powerful of magical words. The Jewish magicians, too, use the holy names of God for their rituals. Sometimes rabbis even bless these amulets inscribed with verses from the Torah and endorse the use of names being invoked in the various inscribed spells. An example of one of these Jewish amulets was discovered at Aleppo, stated as follows, quote, good amulet, which is written the following, holy, one amongst the great and amongst the saints. Your name is holy, supreme God, exalted, my help, Lord Elecha, Arhem, Yah Shaddai, God of heavenly aid, in the name of Achref, in the reign of the moon, I abjure you by the rose and by the cold and by the fire and the clouds. How's that for an example? Huh? Well, the amulet itself bears the Jewish names, Yahweh, of course, and Yah Shaddai, right? Other deities, as Achref, appear. Cosmological symbols were found on the amulet, most notably the sun and the moon, and various planets and the stars. So, yeah, Jewish magic was used and embraced by early Christians, and they used it. They believed it was powerful, automatically doing things. God's power was in it, but it automatically worked. And what was John Chrysostom's advice concerning Jewish magic? He told the Christians of his city of Antioch that it was better for them and their souls to refuse these magical remedies, even if they proved effective. The price was just too high in his opinion. He only tells of how one magician in Antioch informed one upstanding Christian woman, quote, this is only a charm, not idolatry. But John fired back that this amulet was a device of Satan, a noxious drug and honey. Of course, the Christians of Antioch did not understand what he's getting so upset about. After all, when he did the sign of the cross, were they not practicing a magical act in the sense of protecting them from demons as well as to heal them? Or is that just that's a miracle, right? And John did not. Here's the problem. Here you're thinking, well, yeah, if you go from Catholic or Orthodox tradition, it's not magic. It's not understood as magic. And I get that because we live in the modern world. But the ancient world, the problem is they weren't sure. Why? Because I'm going to quote John Chrysostom. Here it is. Oh, John did not help clarify their confusion on this matter. For he often mentioned how the sign of the cross performed like a talisman against evil. Come on, John. He, in fact, instructed them to, quote, make the sign of the cross on their brows as they, for example, entered the Jewish synagogue in order to protect them from powers that dwelt there. He talks about this all over his writing. So, okay. So, but what of Christian magic, right? Could a person use special Christian spells to heal and protect oneself? See, so once again, I'm going to the fact that Christians are thinking themselves are doing magic, right? Many Christians believe they could. You could do practice magic. The Council of Laodicea, which met between 363 and 364, proclaimed against clerics using such magic. This is again from 363, 364. It says as follows. It says, neither higher or lower clergy may be magicians, conjurers, mathematicians, okay, astrologers, not to make amulets. This is from the section number 36. So, yeah, so how do we know that they're practicing magic? Because the church council is saying, stop, clergymen, stop practicing magic. Okay. Oh, okay, that makes sense. At the same time, this council attempted to end the practice of revering angels, both in public and private settings. Of course, since angelology was often used in magical rituals, but as of yet, the church did not officially condemn, it did not officially condemn the use of magical amulets, Christian ones. That just, if just you can't do it if you happen to be of ecclesiastical leadership position. Wow, you think it happened faster? It didn't, right? In the 5th century, Augustine reveals that Christians continued to practice magic throughout North Africa. For example, mentioned in the sermon, chapter 9, 3 and 5, 6, 12, and 88. Yeah, lots. Okay. According to Augustine, hopefully not Augustine, right? Augustine, many Christians viewed the martyrs as magicians. Now, this is coming from a Christian perspective, right? That martyrs were magicians, while their relics were seen as magical. He even talks about this in the City of God, chapter 22, 8. But Augustine took a very dim view on magic as opposed to his definition of miracle. Noting in his work on Christian doctrine, he says as follows: all the arrangements made by men for the making and worshiping of idols are superstitious, pertaining as they do either to the worship of what is created, or some part of it as God, or to consultations and arrangements about signs and leagues with devils, such, for example, are employed in the magical arts, and which the poets are accustomed not so much to teach as to celebrate. He goes on and on. He says, as to this class belong, but with a bolder reach of deception, the books of the haruspices and augurs. In this class we must place also amulets and cures, which the medical art condemns, whether these consist in incantations or marks which they call characters, or in hangings, or typing on even dancings and fashions of certain articles. Well, you can't even have amulets, as hangings. I mean, you just can't do that, right? So, yeah. You know, no, no, it's not allowed. It's forbidden. So, they listen. Oh, maybe they didn't. Oh, look at this. Hey, look at this. Woohoo. What is this? Yeah. It's a hanging. This is the Orthodox Church. What do you see here? Yeah. It's this is hanging to ward off things. So apparently, um, they weren't reading it. And that's for the 21st century. Okay. Are we learning too much here? Now, Palestine actually became, this is where Israel is, right? Actually became the center for amulet production in the 5th century, uh, creating quite a selection of magical trinkets, most of them carved by trained gem cutters working upon various soft stones. Each of these amulets were pierced through the top to be hung around the neck of the purchaser. As for themes, one of the most popular was that of the raising of Lazarus from the dead by Jesus, both of whom were typically represented on the image, while the reverse side contained a spell, often written in Greek, but sometimes in a pseudo language intended for health and protection. The idea was that if Jesus can raise Lazarus from the dead, he can certainly protect the wearer of the amulet. Another theme was the sacrifice of Isaac, again, when all hope was lost. Hearkening to the potential loss of Abraham's son, this disaster was averted in the end. Hence, this was an amulet promoting hope and the possible direct divine intervention. A few um, of the sacrifices of Isaac amulets have what appeared to be Hebrew on the backside, but what was in reality just mere nonsense. The maker obviously did not know Hebrew, but they wanted the amulet to pass off as Hebrew or Hebrew-like. So was the belief of the power of the Hebrew letters. Now, now let's move on to what is the earliest direct evidence of Christians using magic. The earliest direct evidence of magic is a written formula that dates to the 2nd century CE, only 100 years after the foundation of Christianity. It was used as a cure for a headache. It declares, I'm reading it, turn away, O Jesus, the grim-faced one, and on behalf of your maidservant, her headache to the glory of your name, Io Adonai Sabaoth Audio Gabriel. There it is. Wow. Well, okay. The sands of Egypt, of course, preserve many Christian magical spells dating from the 4th century into the Middle Ages. The following spell was to be used I'm going to be reading right now, to be used to free someone from prison. Oh, okay, so here's a Christian spell to free somebody from prison. It says, copy the power. Uh, there's a figure drawn on the manuscript on a shard of a new jar. Then throw them to him. So I guess you're going to have to visit him in prison, and you're going to have to throw it to him. They will force him out onto the streets by the will of God. Okay, it's kind of cool. The offering includes mastic, aluth, kush. So there it is. Another early Christian spell gives the user the ability to create an earthquake. Now, I'm not sure about you, but I really don't want to do a spell that invokes an earthquake. Hello, we're in California, right? So I won't read the whole thing. I don't want to shake you up too much. But it goes, I praise you. I invoke you today, God who is alive forever and ever, who is coming upon the clouds of heaven for the sake of the whole human race. And then it says, Yah Sabaoth, Adonai Elohim. I am Mary. I am Miriam. I am the mother of the life of the whole world. That's interesting. I am the mother of the life of the whole world. Interesting. I am Mary. Let the rock split, let the darkness split. Okay, let the earth. Okay, we'll stop you reading that spell then. So, oh no. Okay, so you get the point. One Christian spell for protection referred to reptiles. Apparently, this person was scared. It's a Christian a recipe for this. Written in Coptic, and what is follows. So this is to protect you from reptile bites. It says a prayer. Okay. It says, when you recite it, no reptile can bite you. Oh, Jesus, I am in Mary. Oh, John, I am in Elizabeth. The Lord Jesus said, let nothing at all me. Then you're supposed to put your name on this day and on this night. It is the mouth of the Lord Sabaoth that said this. Let no reptile bite me, but let all reptiles upon the earth become stone in my presence. They kind of do, when they see you, they kind of freeze up. Anyway, let all those upon the earth become stone or iron in my presence, for it is the mouth of the Lord Sabaoth that said this, and his words of the Lord are true. It is done. It is done. Okay, so there it is. Wow, you didn't know there's so much. Yeah, there's lots of Christian magic. Another spell from an elaborate recipe book, wards against evil in general. So there's one that if you want to go against evil in general, this is there's a series of rituals that you have to do. For first, the person is to draw 4 angels in front of the curtain of the Father. Okay, while you are wearing a wreath of roses with a branch of myrtle in your hand and gum aromatic in your mouth. Next, number 2, you offer frankincense, storax, and stacte. Then you have a nest, and you slay 6 doves. I feel bad about this part. I don't. Following this, you have this offering accompanied by cinnamon and rose oil. Burn this with the charcoal from white wood and olive wood. After all this, the person may begin saying the spell. So that's the preparations. And you say as follows: I invoke you today, the one who governs heavens to earth, from earth to heaven, the great only begotten God. Listen to me today, for I call you only Father Almighty, the mind hidden in the Father, the firstborn of every creature and every aeon. Listen to me, and it goes on and on. There's, of course, Michael is invoked, all right? The one who is over the powers, Arnel, the one who is over the hearing, Ariel, the one who's over the crowns, Naphiel, the one who's over aid, Achantel, the one who's over the stars, Asantel, the one who's over the sun. So you got angels mixed in. Remember the angelology we talked about? It's oftentimes connected with this magic. Ancient Christians used all kinds of spells placed within a Christian context, right down to even a love spell. Yes, you got a love spell. As for amulets, many Christians, part of their everyday life, wore them. In fact, gets to the point that the First Council of Rome in 492 became the first council to directly address Christians wearing these magical talismans. So you have to wait until the year 492. Now, remember, if you're a clergy member, that was so last century, you're not allowed to do it. But it's actually towards the end, 492 of the 5th century, they finally says, oh, maybe you shouldn't wear talisman. And so, in fact, it makes it forbidden, stating that they are not inscribed of the angels as they pretend, but rather those of demons. Okay, well, you see the connection with angelology and magic within the context of course, Christian workings, but obviously even Jewish workings too. Did this work? Well, no, nobody listened. So, the Council of Trullo. This is now the year 691. It's 491. Now it's 691, 692. This is the Byzantine Empire. It does now condemn again the furnishing of amulets in canon number 61. But some scholars say this refers to amulets used for divination rather than amulets used for protection. And that's a possibility. And so the practice of Christian magic continued into the Middle Ages as a constant undercurrent amongst common Christians who believed they needed a more direct way of coping with their day-to-day anxieties. In much of the Greek East, the regions beyond, in Asia and North Africa, the phenomena of magic occupied much of the same uncertain status as it did in antiquity. For example, a tomb discovered in 1993, but only fully excavated in 2009, within the medieval monastery located at Old Bangla. This is the capital of the kingdom of Mikuria in the Nile Valley, revealed 7 mummified bodies in a chamber covered in magical signs. This is not a tomb intended for some commoners who did not know better, but the resting place of the Archbishop Gorgios, who died in 1113 at the ripe old age of 82. Magic everywhere. Here on the whitewashed walls were covered in Black Greek and Sahidic Coptic script, just simply nothing but magical signs. It also refers to the Virgin Mary who appeared in the form of a rooster. Okay, well, whatever. Then, ancient, as we know now, ancient paganism in Gaul, which is France, Germany, and the British Isles followed this course, developing their own unique coping strategies for the earth. When the Germanic and Anglo-Saxon church began to gain influence upon the British Isles, conflict would inevitably result with the earlier indigenous belief systems. The arriving Christian missionaries and priests believed they needed to demonstrate how their religious system was even more powerful in coping with nature's unpredictability than, of course, the religion they believed of the ancestors. If they were to be successful in proving that the prayers of Christians were more effective than the magical charms of the pagans, they assumed they would secure, well, local allegiance to the respective faith, making the path straight for Christianity to replace, well, the earlier belief system. Well, so goes their theory. Yet this technique was often riddled with problems. For to demonstrate how Christian prayers were able to affect the supernatural world and in a superior manner in comparison to the earlier systems, thereby, gaining those adherents, right? He needed proof. He needed evidence that it worked. So came the importance of the miracle. In fact, the public recognition of a miracle is considered the fastest way to establish this necessary proof. Clerics amongst alike noted that miracles converted the more simple folk to the Christian faith. It becomes pretty muddy to discern which is which. Local lives of the saints developed, with each one being viewed by commoners as proof texts that the saints possessed the true supernatural power, documenting miracle after miracle intended to validate their sainthood, their endorsement by God, and their powers over the natural world. These saints were believed to be able to command the elements, much like Jesus calmed the stormy sea, to see into the future, to, move heavy objects, to multiply them, to protect local villages from famine, fire, and flood. And so you have this Martin of Tours, for example. Martin of Tours in the 300s, he has this contest with the pagans, right? And, he wants to cut down their magical tree, right? And so what happens is that, it's a long story, but what happens is that on one occasion, the local callers agreed to cut down their own sacred fir tree if Martin would voluntarily stand in the path of where the great tree would fall. He agreed to do so, but when they cut it down, the tree was about to fall on him and then spun like a top and went the opposite direction and fell on them instead. But what's interesting is that Martin of Tours was believed to be a magical man. And what happened is that amulets will be used in the name of Martin of Tours to cure various illnesses, like, for example, a burning fever. All you have to do is take the name of Martin of Tours, you insert it in the bosom of those who are afflicted, and guess what? It will heal her. Oh, wow. So, then of course you have my relative. His name is, I'm directly related to a German saint by the name of Arnold. He lived between 582, 640. 2 years after his death, which is in July of 642, the body of the now deceased bishop was being brought across this hot, arid area, and everybody's dying of thirst. And so they prayed by the name of the Blessed Arnold, have the water ran out, and he was able to multiply the beer. And so they had all the beer they needed. Okay, so moving right along. But what about the secular perspectives of magic? Well, it may come as a surprise to many, but the edicts of the early medieval era actually attempt to stop any persecution of those accused of practicing magic, especially women. What? Within barbarian Europe. Oh, tell me where. I'll tell you right now. For example, the Lombard Code of 643, it proclaims as follows, quote, "Let nobody presume to kill a foreign serving maid or female servant as a practitioner of magic, for it is not possible, nor ought to be believed by Christian minds." So this is going, so according to this law, magic was mere superstition. It doesn't exist. So why are we legislating against something that we believe that didn't exist? This goes back, right, all the way back to Ignatius of Antioch and early Christian writings, that it doesn't make, why would we do this? It doesn't make a difference anyway. While discussing the conversion of the Saxons to Christianity at the Council of Paderborn in 785, Charlemagne, right, was another relative of mine, did indeed declare idolatry as punishable, but also did declare pagan magic as mere superstition. In a curious way, he also made it absolutely forbidden for anyone to accuse another person as a practitioner of magic. Furthermore, those who not only accused someone of working magic, especially women, he mentions, but who also burned them, were themselves to be put to death. What? If you kill somebody because you believe they're doing magic, guess what? You die. Oh, you didn't know this. So the changes in these beliefs come later in the Middle Ages, not now. It takes things like the bubonic plague and, in the 1300s to change things. This is fascinating, right? Nobody ever talks about the early Middle Ages anymore, right? Charlemagne reinforced these rules at the Council of Frankfurt in 794, calling the persecution, quote, the persecution of alleged witches. He didn't use the word witches. He uses the word evildoers, because the word witch doesn't occur at all on the continent. That is an Anglo-Saxon English word. Anyway, he tells them to cease, for it was just a superstitious belief. Again, those who burned practitioners of magic were to be condemned to death. And this is not only the opinion of secular authorities during the early Middle Ages, but the church as well. How about Gregory VII? He wrote King Harold of Denmark, telling him that he was to make it forbidden to accuse anyone of practicing magic that supposedly led to the failure of the crops, the creation of pestilence, or the formation of a devastating storm. Wow. Hey, what about Caliban of Hungary? This is his first legislative book. This is the decrees of the year 1100. It declares, well, now we're in the 1100s. It declares witch hunting, well, it's actually evildoer hunting, to be illegal. For, quote, these evildoers do not exist, unquote. Curiously, again, the anti-magic decrees did not appear early on the Germanic realms at all. No, it's not there. But instead, they appear in England. The earliest from King Asostan, he reigned from 924 to 939, excuse me. He says, quote, and we have ordained respecting witchcrafts. Now, this is England, so the word witch is used right here. And liebacks, this means sorcery, and mortades, this is murderers. If anyone should be thereby killed, he could not deny it, that he be liable in his life. But if he will deny it, and at threshold ordeal shall be guilty, then he be 120 days in prison. And after that, let kindred take him out and give him to the king 120 shillings and pay that were his kindred and enter in born of him that evermore desist from the like. Quoting, sorry, it's a little tangled, but that's how it's written. Well, this evidence proves that people did indeed presume practitioners of magic. For the most part, the status quo of secular and religious authorities stood against this policy. So much so that death was prescribed for those who did within much of continental Europe. The drastic policy change started to occur. Really, it starts to a little bit occur during the Inquisition, but it's the 1300s again that causes the problem. Now, at the same time, during the Carolingian period of the 9th century, the veneration, even local worship of saints, became firmly established in Western Europe. In fact, each individual church prided itself on their own patron saint, while towns and territories had their own saints too. Many of them competed with one another, and so these were believed as local areas of power, special power, right? That's connected to these saints, right? The saints were, in fact, almost became automatic in nature, connected, as I said, to localities and conjuring up a certain pride and identity amongst those who were represented by them. While these saints could work miracles, they could also inflict great harm. And so they became as feared as some of the most violent ancient gods. In the early 16th century, William Tyndale notes, "We worship saints for fear, lest they should be displeased, angry with us, and plague us or hurt us, as who is not afraid of St. Lawrence, or who dare St. Anthony a fleece of wool for fear of his terrible fire, unless he send ox amongst their sheep." And so there you have it. So now by the 12th and 13th century, the veneration of saints had effectively replaced the various gods and goddesses of much of the British Isles of Western Europe. And we find quite a few of these tales are found in a popular compilation known as the Golden Legend. It was composed in the 13th century by the Archbishop of Genoa, Jacobus de Morang, and translated to English in 1348 for those eager readers in the Isles. By the time of the Golden Legend, saints became part of the fabric of everyday life, and now more than saints being connected to the local church, they became, of course, connected to their own special powers. So we won't go into detail. There's so much I can go here. I want to kind of move along just a little bit here. I will just say quickly that Anglo-Saxon Church co-opted much of the sacred places too. And so they became holy places for the saints believed to have the same miraculous powers, like at Glastonbury, Canterbury, Westminster, Lindisfarne, St. Albans, Washenham, and Norfolk. You know, Norfolk is very interesting because it claimed that 34 people were raised from the dead there, you know. But of course, beyond holy people performing miracles and sacred places creating a setting for the miraculous, there also need to have actual physical objects possessed with the power of God to manifest miracles. Christian fetishes and amulets replaced pagan ones and were believed to ward away evil and to cure the sick. In fact, the church held that while pagan amulets and talismans were either ineffective or connected to the demonic world, Christian amulets and talismans were effective and connected to the heavenly realm. While the pagan words inscribed on metal or paper were products of superstition and misguidance, if the very same pieces of metal paper were inscribed with verses from the Bible, most especially from the Gospels, or if they bore a Christian symbol, often the sign of the cross, they were products of superstition. In that they were believed to have themselves imbued with the power capable of repelling evil and curing illnesses. One of the most famous of these amulets was known as the St. Agatha letters. St. Agatha letters. This is an inscription believed to protect anything that is attached to it from fire. So you have the Agatha letters. You're protected from fire. whether it was on the bells of a church, whether it was the tiles of a roof, or an amulet around somebody's neck. You wear this amulet, you wear this symbol, I should say. Um, you're protected. Of course, the interesting thing is um, Saint Agatha was martyred around 251. She had her breasts cut off in torture. That's horrible. But it was reported that she was actually against images of any kind. So there's a certain irony that her image is used for as a talisman, right? Anyway, rosaries too were used in the same fashion and believed to protect the owner from hostile forces. Another Christian amulet was called the Agnus Dei, which is, of course, the Lamb of God, which was the representation of a wax cake fashioned from pastel candles, bearing the image of a lamb and a flag. These amulets received a special blessing from the Pope in the year of his election, and then every seventh year after that. Agnus Dei was intended to empower the wearer with the ability to defend against the attacks of the devil and demon possession, but was also able to protect them from fire, drowning, epilepsy, pestilence, great storms, goblins. I need that against goblins, right? And help women in childbirth. Wow, you didn't know it so much. There's so many of these. One of the most popular amulets was the prologue of the Gospel of John, that, according to Bishop Hall, was printed in a small roundel. Remember that, printed on a small roundel. So a round little scroll, right? And sold to the credulous ignorance with this fond warrant that whoever carries it about him will be free from the dangers of the day's mishaps. William Tyndale also made note of these Gospel of John amulets, stating how the friars and their supporters constantly peddled them about. He continues, and such is that some hang a piece of St. John's Gospel around their necks, and such as to bear the name of God with crosses between each of the names. Interesting, crosses between each of the names for magical reasons. And of course, we have this connection to the ancient cross, right? Such is the saying of the gospel unto women in childbed, it says. It says, and of course, the word is in principio erat verba, right? And it says from house to house, they would peddle these amulets. Such is the saying of the gospels in the field. And he keeps on going about relics and their superstitious beliefs. In fact, what will happen is the first 14 verses of the Gospel of John were viewed as the most authoritative for these amulets because of its pronouncement of the creative power and absolute truth that was specifically revealed as the workings through the word or logos of God and incarnated in Christ. One of the earliest such Gospel John amulets dates as early as the 5th century, or maybe from the 6th century. It originates from Italy with a cross placed upon the first line, surrounded by the Alpha and the Omega. This textual amulet eventually ended up in a reliquary from the 11th century, discovered at Chartres Cathedral. Now, by the 13th century, Cistercians were reciting the prologue of the Gospel of John to fortify themselves against the attacks of Satan. In fact, a certain Cistercian by the name of Caesarus declared these magical words over protected the lay brother Theodoric. Eventually, two particular verses from the prologue of John were viewed as having the most magical powers of all against darkness. In the Latin Vulgate, of course, since the Greek was not used, the first magical sentence was from John 1:1, in principio erat verbum. In the beginning was the word, right? And second was from John 1:14, et verbum caro factum est, right? A certain friar by the name of Olderic declared these words for protection from a demon, he claimed, in 1320, upon encountering the devastation caused by the great Yangtze floods of China. Olderic himself states, I saw such numbers of corpses as no one without seeing it but deemed credible. And at one side of the valley, in the very rock, I beheld, as it were, the face of a man, very great and terrible, so very terrible indeed that for my exceeding fear, my spirit seemed to die in me. Wherefore I made the sign of the cross and began to continually repeat, Verbum caro factum. And I dared not at all come to that face, but kept 7 or 8 paces from it. Okay, so you have that. Now, I want to say this. So you have these magical amulets, right? You know, and I'm thinking, okay, that's interesting, Dr. Rietveld. You know, this idea of these magical amulets continued to persist, into the late Middle Ages. Continued and continued into the 18th century. And I have one. This is a magical amulet from the 18th century. It's a real one. It is. I'll tell you about what I'm holding right here. Okay, so basically, this is a genuine Roman Catholic talisman. It dates from 1766. It was used for magic, including for healing and protection, and arrives in the form of a small scroll. However, if I unroll it, it is as long as 5 feet in length. It looks kind of like a cigar, doesn't it? Right? You know, typically the talisman was carried upon the individual for their help and their protection. This scroll features the birth narratives of Jesus, with a focus also on Joseph of Mary. Also includes the apocryphal story of the parents of Mary, of Joachim and Anna, with all their names used in the magical section of the talisman, surrounded by a protective barrier. The story of Joachim and Anna has similarities with the birth story of Samuel in the Old Testament, but it's very fascinating. Now, what's interesting also about this is that you're supposed to read the story and the miracle of the birth of Jesus and the miracle of the birth given to Joachim and Anna is supposed to help you give birth, is supposed to help you get pregnant. And also it's meant to protect you from various things. As you can see, this is absolutely 100% real. But what's interesting about this is that this is declared to be authentic and useful for this purpose under the authority of Pope Clement VII, who was Pope from 1592 to 1605. The registry is officiated by a certain M. Sibon from Antwerp on July of 1766. And so this has received official Catholic Church approval. There it is. I won't roll it all out, but you can see that this is absolutely real. And there's a magical section. Oh, maybe I will roll it. A magical section that appears. I'll be very careful here. So we're right here. There, magical section. All right. So what am I saying? I'm saying that magical talisman beliefs in that certain objects and indeed provide miracles in and of itself is an absolute fact. Is it faith? Is it a miracle? Is it magic? Are we playing with these words? I thought that you would find this very interesting. It again is authentic, and I'll put this away into a special safe spot. But I hope you enjoyed that. Now, we're going to go a little bit longer. I want to make sure I got that in because I didn't want you to miss some of the real thing, right? Maybe seeing it is even better than just simply hearing about it. You notice that it's the same kind of role that was mentioned, that was used by those amulets in the Gospel of John, which were also rolled at the same time. Okay, so where do we go from here? Okay, so what will happen? I'll summarize a few sections here. I would say that the church itself, the building itself, was viewed as magical. Even the brick, the mortar, the stones, the wood, once it was consecrated. In fact, even the courtyards were considered holy and asylums in and of themselves. And of course, obviously, the other miraculous moment occurred at Mass with the sacrament at the altar. Here, the host was perceived as having supernatural powers to such an extent that not a bit of the wine or bread could be wasted. For doing so would unleash a series of harmful consequences. The leftover wine of the chalice had to be completely imbibed by the priest. Meanwhile, those parishioners did not swallow the bread. Many of them, what they decided to do is they kept it in their mouths, because it was believed that if they kept the sacrament in their mouths and didn't swallow and walked outside of the church, it was believed that for a short period of time, they had magical powers. So I'm not contesting the idea of a miracle or the belief and perception that miracles are happening. But when you're believing that the object in and of itself, when the maker, we put it into the mouth, the person exits and you still have that power and you can do things unto yourself, it crosses over into a magical realm. Does that make sense? You guys are following me. So, of course, it goes into the question of what is magic and what is a miracle? What is the difference between the power of the gods and goddesses versus the power of God and the saints? What was the difference between the pagan holy sites that cured the sick and the Christian holy sites that cured the sick? What was the difference between pagan images of protection and Christian images of protection? What was the difference between pagan rituals to appease the natural forces and Christian rituals to appease the natural forces? What was the difference between a spell and a prayer? All difficult questions and really riddled with controversy. Some would say it's directional, that what mattered were not the details of these actions, but in what the direction these actions were addressed. In other words, the fact that these actions were directionally pointed towards the Christian God as opposed to the pagan deities or forces was made to be the supreme difference, right? Some supernatural rules, same supernatural rules, just different team, so to speak. The other difference between the miraculous occurring as a result of prayer and magic occurring as a result of a spell is the underlying belief by some that while a spell was perceived as working automatically, with the power residing in the ritual action itself, along with the ability of a medium to harness the occult powers working through them effectively, prayer leading to a miracle was still, a chance possibility, depending upon whether God decided to grant the request or not. A miracle was, they said, not automatic. It was not generated as a result of a conscious manipulation with an intended goal. Furthermore, a miracle was considered to be work of an outside agent of the surrounding natural world, per se, while magic was believed to control and harness forces within magic. So, you're having these things. The reality is, if ancient pagans, they believed then, with this mindset, they made requests to their gods. They believed that their gods could help them or may not help them. And so the funny thing is, this definition between a magic and a miracle can be actually flipped the other way around, because many pagans did not believe that if they did certain actions, it would happen, automatically. They could not command the gods. They could not. Does that make sense? So guess what? It just depends on the practitioner. It doesn't always work the same way. Whoa. Okay. So if the new religion of Christianity was perceived to offer a better package of protection, many commoners, who were the vast bulk of the population of medieval times, would consider converting. So they'll leave their the old ways as long as it proves to be effective. Well, then we get more complicated. And I kind of want to go here just for fun. During the Renaissance, ideas related to Platonism, moved from the Byzantine Greek East across to the West, especially a very mystical, magical form of Platonism in late antiquity called Neoplatonism. The writings of Plato were really reintroduced to the Latin West by the Byzantine scholar Platon, right? And so what happens now is that when Cosimo de' Medici heard about the mystical Neoplatonic Hermetic corpus, he found it was accessible. He reassigned Marsilio Facino to translate this work. Another Neoplatonist was Agrippa, who imported the entire Platonic universe of the idea of the one or the monad, who emanates ideal forms into a universal magical system. He does. Also, Agrippa proposes that from the mind of the one, who is God, he created, quote, angelic and celestial secondary causes, known as intelligences, with God giving the seal of his ideas to these intelligences. From here, the intelligences employed the heavens and stars as instruments, releasing these duplicates of the forms to humanity within the terrestrial realm. Agrippa believed that the macrocosm of the universe resembled the microcosm of the body. For in the same manner, the celestial soul, the intelligences, control the material body of the universe, was the way our soul's intelligences control the physical body. So there's a connection. As above, so below. So the method by which we can send commands from our intelligence to our physical body was believed by Agrippa and Facino as identical to the way the intelligences or celestial souls send commands to the material universe. Now, because the entire universe was viewed as interconnected, this is important, with these forces that are neither good nor bad. So these forces are neither good nor bad. They're simply celestial sympathies. They're simply waves or chords connected to one another, like some giant type that's like a mystical web. These which were connected to, in turn, vital spirits. The universe then becomes neutral. Hence, these celestial sympathies could be moved through certain actions made by those who wish to cause changes within the natural realm. In medicine, Ficino taught how one could capture or manipulate these celestial chords to help a patient through various illnesses, through applying magical lures or baits, utilizing a technique, employing the concept of like attracts like. It's certain stones and metals and plants and organic matter, vapors and smells, sounds and words, mental activities and states can be, through mystical contemplation, can be moved. And the movement of these objects through sympathetic magic will then help you heal. Well, what happens now? Uh-oh. Right. The magic is neutral. The sympathies, the connections are neutral. So whether good or bad action occurs is not the magic in and of itself. It's the one who is the practitioner. You can practice doing good things with your magical abilities, because magic is now neutral, or you can decide to do bad things by like equals like. Does that make sense? You guys got it. And so now what will happen, the legacy of this is that maybe it's not magic that's the problem. Again, maybe it's the practitioner who is a problem that's using these natural forces that are already there. Okay, now we move to the very last part, okay? Of course, now, lots of commoners had figured this out long before, but, we have this high ceremonial conception going in that starts to merge with certain theological ideas. But at the same time, you got people who have already figured things out. And they had various names. In England, they are called cunning men, if a male, and oftentimes called a wise woman if a female. Now, I just want to talk briefly about the term witch. Now, I got to tell you that this was typically, this term um, was applied to women, but with some exceptions between the 1400s on. Now, the witch derives from the Old English word Wicca in the masculine, connected to the general idea of a sorcerer, a diviner, or mystic, right? But what happens is this, that this word is used in English. The word witch is not used on the continent. They don't speak English on the continent. Okay. So when you talk about on the continent of Europe, you're talking about witchcraft trials and all that. They're not even using that word. Okay. So for the Germans, okay, they're using the word hexa. That's the word. They say it's equal to the word witch. It's not. Hexa means those who are casting, you know, dark or evil magic. So automatically, those who are understood as hexa, who are women as well as men, but women are being persecuted because they're doing evil magic, right? They're doing bad magic, not good magic, right? Of course, in Dutch, it's hex, kind of same word. In Swedish, it's haxa, right? Of course, what about in Latin? It's known as pythonism, like a python. This is like the same as a poisoner, or maga, right? In French, it's sorcerer, right? In Polish, cesovica, right? And in Spanish, bruja, right? Italian, strega. None of them are using the word witch. So we got to be very careful about that, right? Very careful. So what happened is this, okay, is that still you have on the continent those who are believed as doing bad magic as opposed to good magic. If you're doing good magic, then it's all right. But then again, the perception gets a little bit cloudy. What do you mean by that? So if you're doing good magic, you must be doing something miraculous through God, even if you are a local healer or wise woman, even if you're a local cunning man, you're doing it through God because it worked out. You heal the baby lives. That's great. Baby dies. Sometimes they think, uh-oh, you must be a bad witch. You must want it to happen. So it's really kind of an insecure situation. I always think of Kepler, the famous astronomer Kepler. His mom, was trying to help a neighbor whose name is Ursula. What a terrible, it's not a bad name, but reminds me of Ursula. Anyway, wanted to help Ursula out. But, Ursula, it didn't work. Her remedies didn't work, and Ursula accused her of doing evil magic. And so the Inquisition came along, and they arrested her. They tried her, they beat her, and then Kepler tried very hard to bring his mom home, and eventually, unfortunately, even though he brought her home, she died as a result of the injuries. Once again, but it's the perception of bad magic. When it comes to England, it's a little different. In England, they will use the word witch, but what will happen is they'll lose the distinction between the idea of good magic and bad magic of the Isles. And so the word witch will eventually become tied to those who are doing the bad magic. Bad magic and the good magic, regardless that the name in and of itself, both good and bad magic, you can't use. So bad magic, you can't use. It's a no-no. That's the British Isles. They're using the word witch. On the continent, they are not using that word at all. But most of the prescriptions are against those who are perceived of doing evil magic. You guys, you see the difference? There are some differences. Now I'm going to go ahead and give a quick summary. So I want to make sure that we cover a few items because I want to wrap this up a little bit with a few more details, if I can indeed flip my pages fast enough. Right? We're getting close. I just can't turn this last page. There it is. All right. Whew, we covered a lot. It's about 40 some pages here, right? So, all right, close it up. So what happens now is that, of course, the Protestant Reformation. The Protestants, of course, attack everything that's Catholic as they claim it's all magical, including the Catholic Mass. In fact, Bishop Hopper declared the Mass being an Anglican, right? They're nothing better than the verses of sorcerers or enchanters, holy words murmured and spoken in secret. John Calvin proclaimed the papists, quote, pretend there is a magical force in the sacraments independent of facious faith, unquote. They, of course, they viewed images as idolatry, and so they often destroyed them to stop their perceived magical powers. Many Protestants argued that miracles should no longer be expected in the present age, that this dispensation of supernatural outpourings happened to be over. The age of magic is over. And these miracles were meant for the first conversions. A certain Reynolds Scott teaches this. Others said that all supernatural activities are of the devil. Now, women, unfortunately, women, the status kind of, I'll just tell you this. Before the 1300s, and the women who were oftentimes midwives who practiced herbs and various remedies were often viewed as holy women, not just wise women, but holy women. And so their perceived miracles or magic were considered good magic. And so as a result of that, many of them even were understood as saints. Saint Hildegard of Bingen, if you're familiar with her, in many practices that before the 1300s, while they're viewed as miraculous, would be viewed as very much magical from our context. So we've got to be very careful, right? But afterwards, local wise women, those who are practitioners of various herbs and remedies, found competition. A lot of competition came away with the rise of so-called professional medicine and male doctors who challenged these local women who practice these remedies, and they're in for the money, so to speak, right? So you have that, right? And unfortunately, at the same time, the church was jealous of those powers as well. They didn't want these good magic to be in the hands of these practitioners, these women, and so they wanted this power for themselves. They wanted for their priests and their clerics, and so it was in their interest to change things around. Okay, so what will happen here is that unfortunately, you have the persecutions, especially persecutions of women, not only in the continent but especially in the area of England and the Isles. Okay, so eventually we start moving into what's viewed as the crime of witchcraft. Now, I got to tell you this is that I'm going to go through the very boring way, but I think it's very important. You want to take notes on this. Is that during the 1500s, legislation towards witches and witchcraft and magic in general changed. The Acts of Parliament of 1542, old Henry VIII, the crime of witchcraft was applied to any negative actions of manipulation or for reasons of misleading others. So this legislation is only towards wicked or evil magic, not at all towards good magic. That was allowed. So under Henry VIII, if you're perceived as practicing good magic as a cunning man or as a witch, you had nothing to worry about except for, your jealous neighbor and so forth, right? The Acts of Parliament of 1563 changes. Acts here of invoking any spirit, regardless of purpose, good or bad, was now assessed as a capital offense if only if their actions resulted in the death of the person. So, so here, now we're under Elizabeth, right? Here, yes, both good and magic, no, if it results in somebody's death, but nothing else, right? So it's still allowed, just no killing people, right? So that's what happens. Well, what happens now is then the Acts of Parliament of 1604, now under King James I, the penalty of death was for witchcraft um, to anyone who did it. That's it. So under James I, if you even do any witchcraft, if you're a witch, then it's just death, plain and simple. You see how it moved from a moderate stance and got increasingly worse? Who's to blame for this? They're called the Puritans. That's right. The Puritans are pushing their agenda in England under Elizabeth, and it comes to fruition against, especially under James, who was kind of a nightmare to begin with, because he already, as the King of Scotland, had all these really negative perspectives towards any kind of magic. He viewed himself as the savior of the church, the Anglican church, that is, and he liked himself quite a bit. But unfortunately, he wrote works on the demonology that also focus against women who are practicing magic and witches. And of course, during his reign, you have the translation of, yes, that's right, the King James Bible. And the King James Bible will have in it, suffer not a witch to live. Of course, the reality is that's not what it says in Hebrew at all. No, it doesn't. This is a manipulation of translation, as you would expect. So, but unfortunately, and then of course, the word witchcraft that you find in the New Testament, yeah, that word is pharmakon. Once again, this word is connected to poisoning, so suffer not a poisoner, specifically a poisoner of wells to live. I kind of get that, right? And of course, in the New Testament, again, against those who are doing potions and poisons, as well as those who are doing, yes, evil magic, evil actions. And so this is the way it's seen, the way it's viewed. I want to make sure that you understand this, right? So, and unfortunately, those Puritans go off and form the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and those viewpoints even continued there. Hello, you have the Salem witch trials for an example, right? So anyway, so that's another point. The other thing I want to bring up is that when it comes to the hammer of witches, remember this is not, it's not the hammer of witches in the Latin. It's malus maleficium. It is the hammer against evil doers. That's what it says in Latin. So it's from the continent. And guess what? I don't have time to go through it. I do have these, but if you're interested after, there are sections that say it leaves, if it's good magic, it's understood as a miracle, we leave that alone. It focuses on evil magic. But unfortunately, it does connect with popular culture and the lore of those female evildoers involved in various ritual Sabbaths and then the mark upon them and so forth. It brings in all of that problematic aspect and a great deal of patriarchy to throw in for good matter. First drink out for a while. So anyway, so you got to understand context is king. It still does not get rid of the fact that the persecutions on the continent were horrendous towards women. It does not end the death toll and the suffering of those who are accused of doing evil magic, right? Because and again, it was manipulated. But I want to make it very clear that the continent has one understanding of that. In many cases, these were under also the canopy of that which is understood as heresy, right? And of course, it stems and grows as a result of the Inquisition. England, however, attacked the name. Anybody who happens to have the name witch, they, regardless of good or bad, they were to be persecuted. And this is, and of course, this blot was throughout the Isles and then continued over into the Americas. We covered a lot. We haven't covered it all, but I think you have the idea that understandings of magic within an early Christian as well as medieval concept moving into the Reformation is really not only really controversial, but it's a problem of trying to figure out an absolute definition of what is magic and what is a miracle. It gets even more confusing when those individuals who happen to be coming from that faith system, who happen to be Christians, they themselves understanding what they're doing as magical, but still related to the miraculous realm, understood as powers. So if they themselves are not sure, we ourselves cannot be sure. Does that make sense? It has nothing to do with the theological ideas that are within the Bible itself. It has everything that is to do with the interpretation of those ideas and concerns. However, having said that, we take a look at the figure of Jesus, and for so many, he was viewed as a great magician. There's a miracle worker. And the same thing, of course, follows into the understanding of the saints and others beyond that. So just what is that definition? Well, may not fully understand because it is all about one's point of view. And there you have it. We are done. We are completed. Have a great day. If you have any questions, we'll go to it. I hope you enjoyed also actually seeing a real thing for yourself. Have a great night. All right. Did you guys enjoy that?
Very much. I do have a question.
Yes.
What was the name of the book written by the Archbishop of Genoa in like the 14th century?
Oh, the Golden Legend?
I'm sorry, Golden Vision?
Legend? The
Golden Legend.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, what is the name of my book? It's called Artemis of the Ephesians. Thank you so much, Kelly. Yeah. So yeah, glad you're able to. Well, you missed seeing the amulet. Is that what you're saying, Kelly? I wasn't sure. Because I'll show it again if you missed seeing it. So, Kelly says the Arthurian character Morgan or Morgan Le Fay started out as a holy woman in Geoffrey of Monmouth before she was perverted over into an evil witch. Yes, that's exactly right. Thank you, Thomas, for saying great lecture tonight. As always, have a good night. Thank you so much. Oh yeah, so good. Any other questions? Oh, okay. Julian says, I heard the story before of Jesus taking the divine name that the high priest would only utter once a year, that everyone would forget, but which had the power to perform magic or miracles. The first time, a few decades ago, I heard he wrote the holy name in charcoal on his arm, so he wouldn't forget how to pronounce it. The second time, a few weeks ago, I heard he wrote it on a parchment, which he hid on the side of his arm. Sorry, I've already forgotten the detail, but I haven't heard it before. It was inside his leg. Do you think it's possible that there's more than one version of the story, or could it just be Chinese whispers that unless each person has the story text in front of them, people just spread different versions of the story? It is part of popular stories and popular transmission, which means that the manuscripts will also vary when it comes to those stories. It's called, hey, in popular culture, those those copyists get a little bit tired. I'm hoping they weren't copying the Torah at the same time and messed up. So there are various versions in manuscripts. So there are different versions of the story. I've actually heard other versions of that story as well, where there's lions on either side of that would actually roar for you to forget the words, as you exit out. So I mean, this is a very, very complicated story. By the way, I'll say this: if anybody's listening, this would be I don't know one right offhand. I know articles. This would be a great focus of a book, going into all of the possible stories and legends, and then putting them side by side. It's a fun idea that you're not going to get paid for it. You're not going to get paid much for it, but you'll have the satisfaction of making a scholastic contribution. So very good, Julian. Thank you for that. Is there any other questions? Any other questions? Did I answer all the questions? No. Oh, no, we got more. You'll have one in a minute.
I'm curious if there's a good book on Jesus as a magician before, I remember hearing about him having a magical staff in some of the old artwork and things, and I thought that was kind of weird, but I've never seen any. Are there good books on that?
There is, and he actually went to Claremont. It's written by Morton Smith.
Okay.
And so, I guess the hardest part about his name is the first one, right?
Oh, is it called Jesus the Magician? That's what came up when I googled it. Morton Smith, Jesus the Magician. Okay.
Yeah. And he's a Claremont scholar, an academic, so it's good.
Okay,
it'll go very deeply into it. Yes. All your answers. All your questions are. Oh, by the way, all your answers will be questioned. I like the reverse. That's better. All your questions will be answered. Although I'm really liking the
get more questions.
Arcane. Yeah. Right. All your answers will be questioned. Kelly, were you able to see the amulet? That was my question.
I did. I'm sorry. My kids, it's late at night and we live in a studio, so they keep coming.
Oh, okay. I was just making sure. I wasn't sure if you were referring that you missed that part.
It kind of looked like a pestle from a mortar and pestle, so I couldn't really see it very well. But
oh, okay. So I won't roll the whole thing again.
Yeah.
And then it won't be.
Oh, it unrolls. Okay. Yeah, I just saw it when it was rolled up.
Yeah. And what's interesting about it, it's up to them. What's interesting about it is that in certain sections, it puts the cross between the letters, just like we described in the other amulets. So it's good. It's consistent with the same legacy as the amulets I talked about. And this is what they look like. Sometimes they were smaller. This is a nice size one. Okay, let's see. Okay, so we have a few questions here. Thanks for clarifying. Would you consider speaking on Agrippa? What you said there was very interesting, and with the appetite for the conception of magic. Absolutely, Cornelius Agrippa would be a great topic. I think maybe Renaissance Neoplatonists would be even a better topic, so I can vary it up a little bit with that. I've done talks kind of on that, but yeah, I can make one that's independent eventually. I like that idea. Dan KS says, so how many different terms for the medieval period specify translation to poisoner? I thought I counted 3 or so that you used. Okay, so a poisoner is used within the context of the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament, and it is used within the context of the New Testament. That word will be translated in different ways depending on your Bibles, but it'll be translated eventually as witches and witchcraft. That is only within the context of the British Isles, because they're not using the word witchcraft or witches in continental Europe, so they can't use those. They're using other words, right? But however, having said that, You're asking something that's good, but what happens is there's legislation against those individuals who are understood as poisoners, but they're also understood as diviners, and they're also viewed as people who do utterances or spells connected to demons. And so it's kind of like a package deal. So that sometimes it's not simply just the poisoner. They'll say this person who is an evil doer, a person who does malficium, right? Strega, right? These people who do this do these actions. So they are a poisoner. They are a diviner. Does that make sense? So it's a subset. So, and the hammer of the witches, which is really the hammer of evildoers. By the way, you can correct everybody now. However, having said that, when it was translated into English, your translators will say, "Ooh, evildoers," and it became popular later on in England. They go, "Ooh, we'll use the word witches instead." That's not what the word means. So it is a mistranslation. And you also got to think. Don't think him. James the First. He was a monster when it came to some of his beliefs and perspectives. I'll just say that. I'll come right out. Yeah, I'm sorry. We have a place called Jamestown named after him, but he's not known to be a very tolerant one, and he's very anti-women as well. And but I'll stop. I'll get off my podium there. So hope that helps. Michelle Ellis says, early in the talk, you mentioned something about Jewish exorcisms. Are Jewish exorcisms much different than Catholic ones? Thanks for the great lecture. Oh, thank you, Michelle. To answer that question, there are some major differences, but of course, there's still lots of similarities. You have the similarity of you do have the laying on of hands, you do have the reciting of the holy words, but these are, of course, the holy words of God. Whereas in a Jewish exorcism, a Christian exorcism, excuse me, you're using obviously, declarations of Jesus Christ. May the Lord Jesus Christ, come out of you, unclean spirit, and so forth. You're using that. In some cases, though, you do have the placing of some kind of object upon the person to cleanse them. So there are lots of similarities, but there's certain, when it comes to ancient times, many of the Jewish exorcists simply pronounce magic words connected to the Hebrew alphabet, and Hebrew letters, and whatever the demons are jumps out. So it really depends. It depends. I guess it depends on the era. So, but I guess they all have the same point in mind. Let's get rid of the demons. Let's say something, and let's do something to get them all out. So, JNKS says, interesting. Could you have possibly been referring to the use of substances? Yes, uses of substances can be included, not just poisoning, but uses of various herbs to enter into shamanistic or mystical states, right? Because you're going into those states through these agents that are other than perceived as God. So yes, you are. So you're altering the consciousness through these through the means other than by evoking the power of God or something falling upon you. So the answer is yes. So but I want to go a little further on that one. It's interesting because don't tell anybody. I'm publicly telling you, don't tell anybody. You know that earlier on in the Middle Ages, people were taking things in a shamanistic way, and they believed it's just part of a natural kind of connection with God. Because shamanistic ideas bleeded over to those early Christians who are still continuing these earlier practices, and they thought they're simply connecting with God through God's natural realm. God made these things. So after all, why can't we use them? But this is, again, something else for some academic to write a book on that hasn't been written, that you will not get lots of money for. But you'll have the pride of contributing. Does that help? So the answer is yeah. Now, any other questions? Yeah, yeah, you gotcha. Thanks. Right. Yeah. Okay. Moving right along. All right. So I'm going to go ahead, do a lecture on Asclepius. And that sounds really good, especially when it comes to medicine. And I've been to Pergamum, where they have the Asclepian, and I've explored that. So anyway, yeah, thank you, Kelly. Thank you so much. We'll have a great night, and I will talk to you later.
Thank you.